here. I've had something hiding for a little while. Back in my Napa Auto Parts here. Something in that box right there. So we're going to pull that out. Maybe this will give you a bit of an idea what's hiding in this box. So what we got here is a W58 transmission. Came with an explosion-proof blanket, which we'll probably use in our other race car project. I've got the R series bell housing out of a truck, 22R motor, I believe. So we'll see if we can make that work with this. And I did also take the slave cylinder off of the Supra that this came out of. This is a P-type Supra W58. And the transmission mount, I'm not sure if we'll need it, but maybe you can combine both pieces of transmission mounts. Here's the R series valve housing from the R motor. They're from two different vehicles, and both have the starter on the right side and the clutch fork holes on that side. I want to remove this bell housing for start. We're going to need a couple bolts to come out of there. The bolts in here are a 14mm. So, got it propped up here. We can pop it out of the dowel pin. There we go. Bell housing for the Supra with the clutch fork. So between the two transmissions, there's about 2/16 difference. The truck one being 6 and 5/16 inches, and the Supra is 6 and a half, I think. So I got the two clutch release forks, I think you call them. They are close to the same. From the pivot points here, that all lines up. And then the difference is where the slave cylinders are going to push. You can see there's a bit of a different length. So I have the R series clutch fork in here, and in the R series bell housing, and the throw-out bearing from the Supra transmission bell housing combo. So we're going to put that on there. But it's just all test fitting and figuring at this point. Got the clutch fork in here with the throw-out bearing. It's all bolted up. This is a W series to R series bell housing on the W58 transmission. Now we gotta unbolt the drive shaft. We'll see how tight these. Okay, now we're going to take the hanger bearing out. It's 12mm. And that's just pull right out. Alright, so they both have 21 splines from what I've counted on the drive shaft to the tail shaft. So we're going to do it. We're going to just see if we can fit them in there. We've got action. Now after you've lifted up this rubber cover, the shifter stick has to come off. So we're going to pull out the Phillips head screws. I kind of want to use the longer, skinnier one so it looks OEM. Something about a long, skinny shifter stick on the old car like this just seems right. So then we got to unplug I'm thinking this is for the reverse light. There's one cable, or one wire, and two wires. So there's your two-prong terminal on the stock transmission for the reverse light switch. Now I have to take out the speedo cable, which is proving to be pretty tight. So we're going to try and get a vice grip on there. Get some teeth. There you go. You just unscrew it and pull. And there's your speedo cable end. Right here is the clutch release cylinder. We're going to take out this bolt and this bolt. I'm guessing it's a 12 or 14 millimeter. And it pushes on the clutch fork, and here's a spring to tension it. So we're going to have to remove this spring and take these two out, get those two bolts out. I want to start by seeing if we can get this cable out of here. There it is. Then we get our 12 millimeter bolts for the clutch cylinder. So we're loose. We're not going to bend that. I'm going to go up top now. So this bolt here is attached to the slave cylinder hard line, and this rubber line here. So I'm thinking if I unbolt this, I can move for the clutch cylinder. I don't know if it's a slave cylinder but it's the hydraulic cylinder that pushes the arm for the clutch. So if I can unbolt this, this will be able to come up and I can set it on the engine here. So let's see what happens if we get anywhere close to that. And to take note, there is a ground behind all of this here. Yeah, so the ground goes first against there, and what I'm going to do is just put the bolt in to hold it in place. So the ground would go, then the bracket for the clutch hose and hard line, and then it all get bolted together. We'll just bolt the ground on so we remember where everything is. We'll just set it up there like that. Our next job is the starter, and there's two 12 millimeter bolts, one down here and one up here. There's a second bolt. There's a starter. We'll set it aside there. Back there is a bolt here and a bolt here for the top of the bell housing. We're going to take those off. Looking from the front of the car, there's a bolt hiding here, here, and two more, and they are 14 mil bolts. So we're going to take those off next. I'm going to take off transmission mount bolts. The ones that bolt to the transmission mount to the tail shaft. And then we're going to have to take the transmission cross brace off. We're going to need a 12 millimeter socket for that, and we're going to also have to do some bracing. So up in there I've braced the oil pan, as the instruction manual says. Alright, now we are taking off the transmission cross brace. Alright, the brace is off. I'm guessing yours won't be a 13 mil if you're doing this at home, because I think I modified the nuts and bolts with what I could find at the hardware store. So now our transmission is supported by the jack and a transmission jack piece. Alright, there's 4-speed out. Now let's compare a little bit. That's the 4-speed, and that's the W58. It'll be really nice to have the overdrive gear. We'll have to compare clutch forks from the Celica And the throwout bearing, we'll compare splines, input shaft length, and check the overall length of the transmission, and then the bell housing height. So I got both transmissions, and the 4-speed and the 5-speed. The 4-speed is this one here, and I got 28 and 10/16, and 28 and 10/16, 1 and 3/16 to the input shaft, 1 and 2/16 to the actual transmission. So this one is a little bit more. The back point of the shifter is 25 and a half. And this one is also 25 and a half. So the shifters may actually line up nicely. And the front of the shifter point is 23 and a half. This one's just about the same. The cross member height at the back or at the front is 22, and the back is 24 and a half. This one is 18 or 17 and a half and 19 and a half. So even though this part and this part's the same height on the transmission, to the tail shaft or to the output shaft, it sits at 1 1/4, and this one is 9/16. So it's a little bit on this one's a little bit longer. So even though the factory 4-speed is a little bit shorter, so basically factory 4-speed sits a little bit closer to the back of the car, and the W58 has a little extra play for the shaft length. As long as we get enough spline in there, that should work, because at the hanger bearing it's mounted solid. So we'll find out once we do the test fit. I'm pretty excited that the shifter locations match. So this is the Supra transmission, and this is the Celica 4-speed. And I took some measurements. So just held the board across here so I can measure off the input shaft. This shaft is a little bit shorter that way, sitting in further. This one's a little farther out, so we shouldn't have any binding issues. So I took a couple measurements of the input shaft here, and this is the Supra transmission, but for the Supra one, this shaft sits in a little bit further than it does on the Celica 4-speed, which I think will be okay. Basically from this flat point here till flash across here on the Supra one, we get 3.5 or 3 6/16 inches, and on the 4-speed we get 3.5, so it's a little bit shorter there, so we won't get any binding here. Then to this point where it just starts tapering out, on the Supra one we get 1 inch, and on the Celica one we get 3/4 inch. So now I got to count the spline. So both splines on the input shaft are 21, or there's 21 teeth on there. I had the transmission in once already, and it stopped on the dowel pins here. As you can see, these are, well, you can't tell anymore, but these are wider than these, so I took a 5/8 drill bit and drilled it out halfway, just like this one, so that they both can still go in there. These holes will work up here, and we'll have to test fit the starter yet. And these holes should work. We'll do another test fit. Then another difference is this hole still works, there's some support brace, but this one on the W58 here, so it's this one, and this one are wider, or are bigger. So I'm going to have to run a through bolt with a nut and a lock washer on the back side, which actually works nice for mounting because the steering rack gets in the way. So those are the next fit items we're going to do. So this is my solution to the holes that were bigger on the bottom of the transmission for the braces to the engine block. I got a bolt. It's a 9/16 inch bolt, and I'm going with 1 inch threads on the end, and it's a 2 3/4 inch long, 2 washers, this is 2 3/4, 2 washers, a lock washer, and a nut, and tighten those down. And the transmission does fit. Widening those dowel pins is what it needed. Now we're just going to tighten it down. So I'm going to need to order a clutch kit. I think this one will need a clutch. I'm using the original clutch from the Toyota R Series motor. I got the clutch fork from the truck and its throwout bearing. And I've ordered from Rock Auto a slave cylinder for the truck because it needs a style that'll mount here and line up with this spot. And the cool thing is, a lot of guys are saying it wouldn't work, but mine seems to come up through the hole here. So it seems to be centered enough to work. We'll figure it out once the stick goes in. So the transmission is in. Next thing will be building a transmission mount, which actually looks like it's going to line up as well closely. I might be able to modify my existing parts from, let's get the light in here. So here at this point is my last bolt hole, and here's the cross member. So if you go line up from the bolt holes, which is here, cross member, we're actually pretty close. So this is going pretty smoothly, it seems. So there's the starter in the factory location, bolted in. Another thing to note, the speedo cable is, once I pulled out that angle piece, it bolts right in, so that's good. This cable here on the transmission, it's got yellow wire and a red wire with a blue stripe, and they come off of 2 black wires. But what I'm going to do, I've tested continuity. When it's in reverse, this one has current running through it, and these are the ones that are running into the car that came off of the Celica transmission. So I'm going to cut it off and then cut it here so I can keep this plug. I have a nice plug for unplugging the transmission, and I'm going to solder it together and heat shrink it. I have now soldered the car's wiring harness to the transmission's wiring harness, and that'll give me the reverse lights. Oh, this is the Supra shifter stick. With the factory tunnel uncut. First, second, third, fourth, fifth. This is the original 4-speed cross member for transmission, and we're going to start by cutting this, just notching it out so that I can bolt it in place. Right now the transmission mount on the W58 is hitting in this area, so we're going to knock some of that out of there. Right, so now you can see we've taken most of it out. Now it's getting a little flimsy, but we should be able to bolt it in at this point. There we go. This is the transmission Original 4-speed transmission brace on the last two holes. So there you can see it, how far back it's sitting on the last two. There's a bunch of different bolt options. The original one sat in these kind of bolt spots. I think it was these two, and the new one's all the way to the back. You can see where I had to cut for the rubber mount and for the transmission. So that's why I was making the cuts, just so we could get this sitting in place, and then we'll grab our other part. The next thing is the Supra mount. It has to sit in this hole, the one with the big, where my pointer finger is, and we want to graft these two together is my plan. And it looks like the speedometer cable goes by my thumb, and so then that means it'll sit in the car this way. So I was noticing the speedometer cable was getting in the way. So the plan is to cut enough of the original one out to weld this one into there. So I forgot to take into account that the transmission had sagged. So now I've got it at the right height, and I've modified the Supra cross member. You can see how I've bent it up and cut it, and it's going to slide in here, and then we're going to weld it here. So this is my modified W58 T822 cross member. You can see the original part there. I've cut it open, and then here's the W58 P-type Supra transmission cross member. I've welded in a little triangle here to brace it, and then there's kind of the front view. Here's the bottom. So what I've done, I've bent them, bent the edges of the cross member because it used to come straight out, and I welded it to here, and to here, here and here, and then I've welded it here as well. And so this is a piece. I'm very happy with that. So we're going to bolt it into the car. This still has the cutout for the exhaust, and here's the section I added, and it snugs the transmission in there. Now I should be able to pull the jack away and put the drive shaft in. So here's the Celica slave cylinder for the clutch, and this is the one for the truck bell housing, or is it maybe the Supra, I'm not sure. But the problem I'm having is this piece is touching the bell housing. You can see the angle there, so that's a problem, and that it needs these two bolts to mount. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to build a bracket that uses these two holes. So there'll be a hole here, and then a bolt will bolt through here on my bracket, and then there'll be an L shape. Then I'll bolt this to the bracket, and that will give me the piece I need, and should have enough strength to keep it straight when you're pushing the clutch in. Now I'm going to build it out of this, so that's for sure going to be strong enough. It's not going to move. So the box I am using, the cereal box, is Lucky Charms, now with magical unicorns. So this is going to be the mystical unicorn L-shaped bracket that'll make the clutch magic happen. So I ended up finding this in the scrap bin, a wider piece, and I cut the 90 out of the 2-inch square tubing that I just showed, and I tacked it in place. I need something to rest in, so then I will stick this in here like this, so that the tube, because as you can see the tube actually comes lower than the tabs where it mounts, so then it will actually sit in there. So I got the welds done. The next step I think is going to be slicing this top plate out of here. This is my bracket that I've made. It should be quite durable. It's a 188 wall in the center, and I think the wider rectangle tubing was a little bit smaller. But basically now we got to drill the holes in there. This is a completed clutch slave cylinder bracket. Kind of got that shape, and the hump is where the slave cylinder sits in. So let's take a look at how that fits on there. So here's your bracket, and this is the bottom, and this cutout here to fit against the transmission needs a little bit of space there. And so this hole and this hole will mount into, we'll use to hold the slave cylinder on, like that. And then this hole and this hole will bolt to the transmission. Had a bunch of parts come in from Rock Auto. This one's I've installed already. That is a transmission to transmission cross member mount. It looks like this here, and that's part number on there. I have the transmission's got to come out again so I can install this. The pilot bearing, mine crumbled into little pieces as soon as I touched it. I was gonna try and use this, which I still could, but then I gotta work with hoses, so I managed to make the Celica one work. It's a new slave cylinder for the truck, and it's got the bleeder screw on the right side, whereas the Supra one has the same, it'll fit here, but the bleeder screw angles the other way because it sits on the other side of the bell housing. So this one's for the truck, that'll work. If I need a backup, I can make that work with getting the right hoses. I got I believe this is a clutch hose if I needed it for the truck. So maybe we could adapt that if we need to adapt it. So that'll go in the parts bin for now. Clutch alignment tool. Going to need that. Going to pull the clutch out. I'm not going to be redoing the clutch right now. Here's the Celica hose. I'll need to replace that at some point. The other thing I wanted to mention about my slave cylinder bracket for the clutch, I like using this bracket idea because now when I go to order parts, let's say this part wears out or I need something like this or a hose to match, I haven't made custom hoses. I can just go and reorder the Celica hoses. So I mean the truck piece is an option, but this allows me to use factory Celica parts. So this is the old pilot bearing. I got the new one installed up in there. I grease it up a little bit and I can reassemble everything. So here's the shifter location. It's almost centered in this hole. This is the final resting place for the transmission shifter. And then underneath with the drive shaft, it all fits. There's the mount that I built or modified. Ground is on. Got the modified Supra brake light sensor and clip, so we can unclip it now. And I've soldered that and heat shrinked it. So bolted up nicely. What we gotta do yet is I'm gonna have to extend this arm a little bit because when the spring is on, then it rubs a little bit on the rubber of this boot. But the bracket is here, and yeah, it's all good to go.